Welcome back. I'm Vince Perryman and you're watching Legalese. Joining us on our show is Austin Byrd of Bailey & Greer, PLLC. We're discussing mass torts, defective drugs, and medical devices. Austin, before the break, we kind of got into what a mass tort was, how you come about it, whether, and if you think you've been a victim of a mass tort as far as a drug or a product. Now, what are some concrete examples that we've got going on?
Well, Vince, one of the things that our firm is looking at very carefully, and we have quite a few clients from many states engaged with us on this particular subject, and that's the pelvic mesh. Surgical mesh was originally FDA approved to repair hernias, and it wasn't tested for use in a woman's pelvic region. After several childbirths, sometimes the tissues in the pelvic area can become unstable, and that results in an organ prolapse or stress urinary incontinence, and that's pretty common. What happened was the manufacturers of these products began to suggest that they be used for repair of those pelvic structures. Doctors originally did this kind of on their own, and I think it got to be where it was common. And a number of these products are just not compatible with the pelvic tissues. It's different than an inguinal hernia, for instance, when you repair those. The material is made of a synthetic plastic, polypropylene, and it has a rough surface, and that rough surface can cause erosion, and the organs in the pelvis can rub together, and that's what's causing such a big problem. It results in very serious injuries. The material can degrade and basically fall apart. It can contract, so when it's sutured in to anchor points, it can contract and cause a good deal of pain. There are infections. The material can migrate and become embedded in other tissues. And once that happens, once it grows into an adjacent organ, then it can disrupt that organ, and it can be very difficult, if not impossible, to remove. I've talked to literally dozens of women who have had problems or complications from this product, and they're all in a substantial amount of pain and distress, and it's very disruptive to their intimate lives as well, often. So these products should be carefully looked at. There should be a very serious discussion with a physician before contemplating using a mesh for any pelvic repair.
And I guess one thing that brought to mind in the descriptions of some of the problems with them as far as being difficult to remove and where they've been placed is, would that be akin to where we see a tree that's built next to a fence and it grows into the tree to where the mesh is hard to
Yeah, you've seen that. You've seen barbed wire wrapped around a fence post or something, or a tree, and the tissue does tend to grow around it and it becomes embedded. And you can imagine how difficult it would be and how irritating it might be to that tissue, and causing a lot of pain and irritation, and potentially there's an infectious or an infection reaction sometimes in the tissues. One thing about the pelvic mesh devices, and I brought some paper here so I could have some statistics in front of me. In 5 years, there were 4,000 reports to the FDA of problems. In the last 3 years, about 1,500 of those reports were pelvic organ prolapse problems, and about the same number were for stress urinary incontinence. And that rate was climbing at a multiple of five times. So we think that the incidence of these problems is drastically underreported, and we think that the problems are very significant. Originally, the FDA came out in 2008 with something called a health notification, and they said that there would be rare complications with serious consequences. The FDA updated that to an alert status in 2011, in which they said there are serious complications, they're not rare, it's not clear that mesh repair is more effective than traditional non-mesh repair, and this mesh product may expose patients to greater risk than using other materials. So it's a pretty significant problem. I don't think the doctors who were using these products really knew at the time that these problems were going to exist. I think it's all on the medical device companies they're kind of experimenting, if you will, by putting these products on the market before they really understood how they were going to behave inside your body.
Right, and then I guess that kind of covers the pelvic mesh part of it. And then we've got some other drugs that you mentioned earlier. Actos, I think, was one.
Actos is one. Actos is a pill that you take for type 2 diabetes. It's the competitor to Avandia. Actos is made by a drug company called Takeda. It's a Japanese drug company. And once again here, the public relies on the data that's submitted to the FDA. The FDA does not independently test these products. They have a panel of reviewers, and when they decide to approve the product, they just look at the data the company provided. And they scrutinize it, but if the company didn't provide the right data or all the data, then the approval might not be merited. And what we found out with Actos is that we believe the company manipulated the data, that it gave and then the doctors and consumers wouldn't have any idea what the true risk-benefit profile of the drug would be. So Actos is a pretty good example of what happened there. There was a woman who was a medical reviewer that worked for Takeda, and she's filed a lawsuit. It's a whistleblower lawsuit, and she alleged that Takeda falsely underreported serious adverse events, and specifically we're talking here about bladder cancer. So people who take enough Actos have a much more elevated risk of getting bladder cancer, and people that were prescribed that drug would never have known that in the beginning, and the doctors would never have known that because, according to the whistleblower, they didn't accurately report the risk of bladder cancer to the FDA.
Okay. And then we've got 30 seconds left in this segment, so I don't know if we want to get into Pradaxa or stay on Actos.
Well, I just want to say that one other drug we're really focused on is Pradaxa. Pradaxa is a drug that's similar to Coumadin or warfarin. It's an anticoagulant, so you're given that drug if you don't want clots in your blood. The problem with Pradaxa appears to be that if your blood gets too thin and doesn't coagulate correctly, it's hard to reverse that effect, and the problem is with uncontrolled bleeding. So anybody that's exposed to or taking Pradaxa should be very careful about excessive bleeding.
Okay. When we return from our break, we'll talk more with Austin Byrd about mass torts, defective drugs, and medical devices. Please stay with us.